have so many different business structures in France. We talk about the micro and the entreprise individuelle and the entreprise unipersonnelle à responsabilité limitée and the société par action simplifiée unipersonnelle. And that's only if we're working by ourselves, because then if we want to partner up with somebody else, then we can also talk about the société à responsabilité limitée and the société par action simplifiée. So we have a ton of things, and of course it's confusing, but it's also super important to get this right, because the wrong choice will suck all of the profits out of your business, whereas the right choice will make you and your business prosper. And of course, that's what we want. Instead of just describing them and the differences between them, I thought it would be a more useful exercise to explain how each of them works with relation to an entrepreneur's main preoccupation. And then after all of that, we're going to have a look at which one might be the best strategy for you in your particular situation. What do I mean by security? I'm talking about how well your personal property is protected in case of problems. We could make a professional error, or we could just have one bad client, and if they happen to be our biggest client, then that could also be disastrous. Or they could find another pandemic for us. If your business has to close down and you have outstanding debts, then what you do not want is for your personal property to be forfeit. And the only way to protect your personal property completely is to have an absolute separation in between your personal property and your professional property. Okay, so if we look up at this, then what we can see is that the micro and the entreprise individuelle come in at the bottom. I know that in the last couple of years, the law has changed to improve the protection for these people, but just never be as complete a protection as there is for limited companies where the separation between personal and professional is absolutely defined. Now, obviously, if you have any fraudulent behavior, any embezzlement, if you have put your personal property as a guarantee on a professional debt, then that's going to bring your personal liability back into play again. But otherwise, you are absolutely safe. And the only reason why the SASU comes in higher than the L is because if your company has to close down, if there are outstanding social charges, then the director of the Earl is still personally responsible to URSSAF, whereas the president of a SASU has no personal liability whatsoever, even when there are outstanding social charges. But now if we want to talk about setup, well, that's completely the opposite, because for a micro and an entreprise individuelle, it could not be simpler. You can do everything yourself, you can do it online, whereas obviously a limited company does require more work, there are more formalities to complete, so yes, it's more expensive. However, for a matter of a few €100, you can have all of that done for you. And sincerely, if a limited company is going to be a better solution for you, then I do not think we can take that startup cost as a deal breaker. So let's move on from that and let's talk about. So here we have two completely separate regimes. We have income tax and we have company tax. And if you look at the two boxes, then what you'll see is, apart from the micro, which can never declare company tax, all of them can be in either one or the other. So how do they work? Well, with income tax, the whole profit from your business's activity is regarded as your own personal revenue, and all of it is subject to income tax. Whether you need all of that money or not, whether you have drawn all of that money or not, it is still regarded as your personal revenue. Whereas with company tax, well, the company pays its own tax like a whole other person, and you, the individual, you only pay tax on the sum that you actually draw as your remuneration. So does that mean that paying two different taxes, you pay twice as much tax? Well, no, not at all. What it does mean is that you can manage much better the amount of tax that you pay, both personally and professionally. Remember that whatever you draw from your company is tax deductible for your company. So if you draw a lot, then your company will pay less, and if you don't draw very much, then your company will pay more. But Being able to decide how much you draw is going to allow you to optimize these tax levels to your own best advantage. On top of that, it makes your income tax much more predictable, because instead of having to wait until the end of the year to work out exactly how much profit you've made and therefore exactly how much income tax you owe, you know already from the start exactly how much you're going to draw in remuneration, so you know how much income tax you're going to owe, and that makes your treasury much more manageable. And I've put a note up here, progressive, because company tax, like income tax, works in a progressive way. Your first tranche of money falls into a lower tax band, and then once you've maxed out that tax band, then the next tranche of money falls into a higher tax band, and it's not because you've gone over a threshold that all of your money is suddenly taxed at a higher rate. So these are the default positions for each structure, but also they all have their own options, so nothing's written in stone. With the micro, the default position is to pay income tax on your turnover. However, there is an option to pay income tax at a flat rate as you go along under certain circumstances. Entreprise individuelle, you pay income tax on your net profit, although you do, since a couple of years ago, have an option to declare company tax. Honestly, I would personally choose to be an EURL and have the extra protection. But you do have the option, and if you choose it and it turns out not to work out for you as well as you had hoped, then you have 5 years to change your mind and come back to declaring income tax again. The EURL declares income tax also on net profit. It does have the choice to declare company tax, and as an EURL, if you choose this, that choice is irrevocable. And the SASU is by default declares company tax, although you do have an option within the first 5 years to declare income tax for a maximum of 5 years. And that may work out for you, it may not. But to help us decide, I prepared this little table of pros and cons. So with the micro, well, the biggest advantage is that it's simple. We've got hardly any administration, accounting, paperwork, anything to do. But the biggest disadvantage, obviously, is that we can't deduct anything. We'll be talking about this a little bit more later on. For the Entreprise individuelle or the EURL declaring income tax, I see no advantage whatsoever in having my whole profit treated as my personal revenue, even if I haven't drawn it all. The biggest disadvantage, well, is exactly that the whole profit is taxed. EURL and SASU both declaring company tax, well, that's fantastic. You're taxed only on the salary that you've actually drawn. And disadvantages, I can't really find any. And SASU income tax, it can be advantageous. It can also be stirring up some problems. It's a little bit complex, and we'll talk about it in another time and place. We have two completely separate systems. We have the régime général, which is what any employee of any company contributes to. And the only self-employed person who falls into this category is the president of the SASU. On the other side, we have the SSI, which is the Sécurité Sociale des Indépendants, and that is for the TNS, the Travailleurs Non Salariés. And what you want to know is, how much does all of this cost? A micro, depending on your activity, you'll be paying either approximately 12% or approximately 22% of turnover in social charges. I think you're probably all quite familiar with the micro. If not, then I have a couple of videos about micros that I'll link at the bottom. With the Entreprise individuelle and the EURL, then you pay approximately 46% of your net remuneration. And the president of a SASU, well, I think we can all agree that's a shitload of money. However, do bear in mind that it's all completely tax deductible. So if you find yourself in a SASU with very high profits and you're facing a huge company tax bill, then your salary and all your social charges are tax deductible, and that may well be worth doing. We've talked about all of that. Let's discuss which one of these strategies might suit you best in your particular situation. Let's look at this one. Unfortunately, I see quite a lot of these people on various forums and Facebook groups and so on. People who think that because they have a low turnover, then they should be a micro, and a micro is the first step on the route to becoming a bigger company. It is not necessarily true. If you are in this position, then a micro is the absolute last thing you should be. People who have considerable expenses, you do not want to be a micro, and literally anything else would be better for you. You need a business structure where you can deduct your expenses. Is absolutely vital for you to be able to do this. On the other hand, if you are somebody who has a low turnover and low overhead, somebody who can literally work online from their home computer, you should start off as a micro. Have a 34% allowance for expenses from the tax office, and you're not even going to touch the size of that. And that's going to work out really, really well for you. However, once you start growing and you get to a point where you have a high turnover and low overheads, the last thing you should be is any kind of income tax declaring structure. You have a high turnover, low overheads, that makes high profits. If everything is subject to income tax and social charges, then you're going to have huge expenses, and particularly if you're a single person with no dependents, the income tax is going to be crippling. Do not choose this. You absolutely want a company tax declaring structure so that you can manage properly the amounts that you want to withdraw from the company, and that's going to allow you to much better manage the amounts of tax and social charges that you pay. So I hope I've answered some of your questions and that's all a lot clearer for you now. Obviously it's not exhaustive, but if you found this video helpful, then don't forget to click on the subscribe button, and I'll see you again soon.